Before we begin, let the room grow quiet. This is Europe in the 1990s. Walls becoming doors, Schengen gates opening, a train under the sea turning water into a timetable, labs sharpen a space telescope, find distant planets. The web leaves the lab, and small phones teach pockets to talk. A decade where systems quietly changed everything. This is 1990, feels like the hush after thunder. Borders ease, desks fill with new paperwork. And ordinary mornings start to carry extraordinary possibilities. The continent learns new rhythms. Trains cross places they once stopped. And laboratories hum in the background, quietly shaping the decade to come. Germany becomes one. An industry rewires itself. In the east, ballots are cast in spring, and a road to unity is chosen. By summer, currencies merge. The D-mark enters kitchens and shops. Prices and wages search for balance. Families do careful maths at the table. Factories meet a new market. Some are reborn, some wind down. And a vast office called the Privatization Agency begins its patient work, cataloguing, selling, and safeguarding. Engineers reconnect power grids, align rail timetables, retune telephone exchanges, and stitch two industrial systems into one. Stage 1 of economic and monetary union begins across the European community. Capital controls ease. Central banks coordinate more closely, and the habits of a single market inch forward. October arrives. Flags and forms change, and Berlin exhales. Unity is not only ceremony, it is logistics, supply chains, standards, software, and the quiet heroism of maintenance, science and space. Europe looks outward. A new eye opens above the atmosphere. A space telescope begins work, its first images blurred, its promise intact. European instruments ride with it, and European astronomers prepare catalogues, calibration plans, and patient corrections that will sharpen the mirror and the mind. From a launch pad, a joint spacecraft begins the long arc toward the sun's poles. A European curiosity tethered to a careful machine, bound for data no one has ever seen. Closer to home, a European star-mapping satellite continues its steady scan, turning the night into a precise archive, so future travelers can navigate by numbers as well as by memory. In Geneva, in quiet offices, a simple idea about linking documents becomes working code. A first server, first page, a browser that reads its own instructions, the web's earliest breath. Across universities, academic networks adopt shared protocols. Email spreads from labs to libraries. And a generation of students finds that a message can cross a continent in less time than it takes to cross a campus. In London, clinicians report something new in reproductive medicine. Babies born after checking a cell for inherited illness. A technique careful in its purpose and profound in its comfort to certain families. Across Europe, epidemiologists strengthen surveillance. Geneticists map markers, and a global genome project begins, with European institutes preparing to take on large chapters in the years ahead. Computing and communications. The decade's toolkit arrives, on office desks and kitchen tables. A new version of a familiar operating system spreads. Windows and icons become normal. Spreadsheets travel home from work, and the personal computer settles into evening routines. In Cambridge, A small Arisk architecture grows into a new company, compact chips with modest power draw, destined for a quiet empire of pocket devices and embedded systems. In standards rooms, engineers finalize a digital mobile system, frequencies assigned, codecs chosen, security and SIM ideas refined, and operators prepare for trials and launch, so that by the early 1990s, a common European handset language will let a train ride pass from tower to tower without a dropped thought. Across the community, a framework for open networks takes shape. The promise that telecommunication services will interconnect on fair terms, that competition can arrive without chaos, and that the modem's hiss will lead to a chorus rather than a quarrel. Dial-up boxes blink in student flats. ISDN appears in brochures, and sysadmins teach themselves to route packets, one config file at a time. Energy and environment, patient engineering. On the North Sea, platforms work through long nights. Pipelines feed the mainland, and energy security remains a daily craft. In Germany, new law quietly improves the future of wind and sun, guaranteeing that electricity from small renewable generators will be welcomed into the grid, paid reliably, nurtured rather than ignored. Environmental scientists publish a careful summary of the planet's condition. Policymakers across Europe underline 1990 as a baseline year, and engineers begin to plan not only for capacity, but for cleanliness, efficiency, and resilience. District heating networks are upgraded, insulation standards tighten, combined heat and power schemes get pilot funds, and the invisible emissions of old boilers start their slow decline. Transport and infrastructure, speed and connection under the channel. A cutter breaks into a companion tunnel, a handshake under the sea, yellow lamps on rough chalk. Two countries joined by engineering long before the first passenger boards. On the rails, a sleek train pushes the limit of steel and catenary, a new world speed record, proof that careful track, precise power, and aerodynamic patience can make land travel feel like flight. New high-speed lines open section by section, signaling systems modernize, control rooms glow with new screens, and travel times slip beneath old expectations. In the air, European airframers refined families of aircraft, extending ranges, improving cabins, attracting orders that keep design offices busy and machine tools singing. At a tropical launch site, a dependable European rocket flies frequent and calm, carrying telecom satellites for broadcasters and data links, making the sky an extension of the fiber in the ground. Industry and manufacturing, adaptation in real time. Automakers redesign small city cars, safer shells, cleaner engines, and dashboards that hint at a digital future. Machine tool makers add numeric control everywhere. Precision spreads, and factories produce with fewer offcuts and fewer apologies. Pharmaceutical labs expand facilities, scaling production for new therapies, while biotech startups spin out from universities, taking enzyme tricks into real-world applications. In the East, new owners arrive. Maintenance backlogs are cleared. Training programs multiply. And workers learn unfamiliar brand names for familiar tools. Retail starts to experiment with scanners and databases. Wholesalers streamline their routes, and logistics firms test software that predicts where a parcel should be before anyone asks. Education and research. A wider classroom. Universities open their doors to new partners from the East. Exchange programs grow. Language courses fill. And laboratories pair up across borders, sharing equipment, methods, and data. A new European program begins to modernize higher education in Central and Eastern Europe, updating curricula, funding joint degrees, and linking professors who once read about each other only in journals. The community launches a multi-year research framework, pooling funds for collaborative science, from materials to medicine, from telecommunications to transport, so that small teams can access large instruments, and good ideas are not stranded by geography. On campus, computer labs stay open later. Librarians learn to catalogue digital files, and students discover that a final year project can involve a modem, a dataset, and a dawn they did not intend to meet. Schools in the East redraw textbooks, add civics, fresh economics, more foreign language lessons, and the practical arithmetic of a market that rewards careful planning, culture and sport, gentle signatures of the time. A northern city wears the title of culture for a year. Shipyards and warehouses become galleries. Musicians tune in former factory halls. And visitors learn that industry and art are kin when the light is right. In stadiums across Italy, summer nights belong to a game, to floodlights like moons, to a tournament that ends with a German team lifting a trophy, a photograph that will share a frame with another in October, when a reunified country learns its new anthem. In living rooms, satellite dishes turn toward fresh signals, channels multiply, and viewers explore a wider menu. From lectures to late-night jazz, from documentaries to distant weather, diplomacy and security, architecture instead of walls, leaders meet through the year, agree to measure forces, to reduce where reduction makes sense, to choose transparency over suspicion. In Paris, a charter is signed, a promise that the continent will seek its security in institutions, in elections, in law, rather than in the weight of armor at a crossroads. In a small town by a quiet river, an implementing convention for freer travel is signed. Doors promise to open more easily in the years ahead, with careful checks that do not feel like fences. Britain steps into a shared currency mechanism, committing to dance more closely with mainland partners. A decision made with calm words and many charts, its full consequences still ahead. On the Baltic shore, parliaments speak their independence. Blockades test patience, candles burn in windows, and Europe watches with steady attention, choosing concern and dialogue over panic. Farther away, a desert crisis rewrites the evening news. European capitals coordinate responses, weigh alliances, and keep their tone even, preparing for what the next year might ask, but remaining firmly in the present, in 1990, in prudence and planning. Everyday life, the texture of change, ATMs multiply, bank cards find their way into small wallets, queues shorten a little, and weekend trips consider a different set of borders. Mail arrives faster when typed, faxes whisper across nights, and a few brave offices install electronic mail and wonder if it will catch on. Shops in the East stock unfamiliar brands, repair services learn new catalogues, and pharmacists translate labels with care. A grandmother walks a child to a place where a border once stood and explains lines that no longer exist. The child nods and asks if they can get ice cream on the other side, which is now the same side. A quiet closing. So 1990 folds itself away, with treaties cooling in archives, with a tunnel lit by work lamps, with a new web page blinking in an office only a few people can find, with a train timetable that suddenly makes a long journey feel short. Europe sleeps on both sides of lines that matter less, and wakes to the small courage of unglamorous work, the patient tasks that make science possible, that make industry safer, that make schools better, that make tomorrow feel a little more spacious than today. We will leave the year here, the kettle warm, the lights low, and the tools neatly put away. When you're ready, we'll turn the page to 1991, quietly, and carry on. 1991, the year Europe learned new tools. Before we begin, settle your breath and let the room grow quiet. Tonight, we'll drift through 1991, watching Europe change its tools, its networks, its factories, its classrooms, and its sky. No rush, only steady steps, and the soft weight of a useful year. A soft map of the year. The continent wakes to grey mornings and practical work. Walls replaced by paperwork. Checkpoints replaced by plans. Laboratories hum. Exchanges of students thicken. New standards take shape in meeting rooms with coffee rings on the table. It is not a year of spectacle. It is a year of systems. And systems quietly change everything. Germany after unity. Decisions, wiring, and patient arithmetic. The excitement of 1990 becomes the diligence of 1991. Budgets meet reality. The Treuhand counts factories. Investors visit shop floors. Some plants restart with new equipment. Some close with severance and retraining. Power grids synchronize. Telecom switches align. Postal codes are redrawn. And software maps a new country, street by street. In June, the Bundestag votes to move the seat of government to Berlin. A choice with cranes and calendars attached. Ministries planning the long migration of desks, files, and habits. Universities pair East and West departments. Labs share reagents and instruments. Young researchers cross new bridges of funding. And scientific councils begin to knit a single landscape of grants and peer review. Germany breathes steadily, not quickly, engineering unity into something that works on a Tuesday afternoon. Science and space. Europe looks outward and downward above the atmosphere. The space telescope continues its early work. Engineers refining mirrors and algorithms. Astronomers calibrating patients as carefully as they calibrate instruments. In July, ERS-1 lifts into a polar orbit. Europe's eye for Earth. A radar that pierces cloud and night. Mapping ice, waves, forests, the slow physics of coasts. At a tropical launch site, dependable rockets carry telecommunication and meteorology satellites. Stitching broadcasters, weather services, and data links into a quieter, more resilient mesh. A British chemist rides a Soyuz to Mir, the first Briton in space. A reminder that science is also courage, and that experiments sometimes need a heartbeat in microgravity. In quiet offices at CERN, the World Wide Web steps from internal project to public invitation. A server reachable from outside, a browser that also edits, and a short message explaining a simple idea that will slowly touch every desk. In Helsinki, a student releases a small, free kernel for anyone to improve, a seed that fits on diskettes, carried by curiosity, watered by mailing lists, and somewhere between Amsterdam and the world, Python arrives, a clean, readable language for doing useful things without noise, adopted first by people who value clarity, then by almost everyone. Computing and communications. Networks become normal. Standards meetings refine the GSM rulebook. Operators light up their first digital cells. And a prime minister makes a public call on a new network that will teach phones to roam as people do. SIM cards slip into handsets. Codecs turn voices into clever numbers. And billing systems learn a continental grammar. Universities route more traffic over TCP/IP. Line mode browsers appear. CS departments quietly add network security lectures. And librarians experiment with digital catalogues that can be read from another city. In homes and small offices, modems blink, bulletin boards grow, fax machines remain loyal, and ISDN brochures promise a future that will arrive unevenly, but arrive. Energy and environment, careful engineering under changing skies. On the North Sea, rigs keep their rhythm. Maintenance windows stacked against the weather. Energy security still a craft of valves and checklists. On the Danish coast, the first offshore wind farm turns, small by future standards, enormous in meaning. Foundations in shallow water, cables ashore to a grid learning new manners. Across Europe, environmental ministries refine measures on air quality and ozone-safe chemicals. Utilities begin efficiency programs. District heating schemes are modernized. Insulation codes tighten. And the idea of kilowatt hours saved becomes as respectable as kilowatt hours generated. Transport and infrastructure, speed, tunnels, interoperability. In Germany, white trains with red stripes begin regular ICE service. Hamburg to Munich through new tunnels and long viaducts. Land travel made quiet and fast. Railway agencies talk about signalling that can cross borders. An interoperable language for brakes and beacons. The early grammar of what will become continent-wide train control. Under the channel, separate bores push farther. Surveyors confirm alignments. Ventilation and safety systems take form. And the project moves from heroic digging to the quieter excellence of electrical, track, and control installation. In Toulouse, a long-range airliner makes its first flight. A 4-engine study in range and efficiency. Symbol of European cooperation in aluminium and composite. And a promise to airlines planning routes they haven't opened yet. Industry and manufacturing. Adaptation on 2 speeds. Western factories add more CNC to shop floors. Quality systems become culture rather than audit. And suppliers learn to feed just-in-time lines with fewer mistakes. Automakers refine safety cells, cleaner engines, better crash testing. An experiment with early onboard diagnostics. Chips in the bonnet. Quietly. Pharmaceutical plants scale up processes for new therapies. Biotech spin-outs from universities. License enzymes and antibodies to real-world problems. Fermentation tanks hum. In the East, privatization turns policy into payroll. Service manuals are translated, machine tools are refitted, and new training lines teach robotics and programmable logic in towns that, last year, only printed paper schedules. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development opens its doors. Capital, advice, and patience for economies changing their foundations. Loans tied to reforms, consultants tied to factories, expertise tied to results. Single market directives continue. Insurance and financial services learn mutual recognition. Customs forms shrink. And logistics firms test software that predicts where a truck will be, before the driver knows. Education and research. A wider classroom with more doors. Erasmus exchanges deepen. Language labs are booked solid. And students collect stamps from cities that used to feel far. Tempus grants modernize curricula in Central and Eastern Europe. Economics departments add new models. Law faculties teach commercial codes. Engineering schools source equipment that matches modern labs in the West. The FAIR program widens, funding textbooks, telecom upgrades for universities, joint degrees, and the simple miracle of a professor in Prague emailing a dataset to a partner in Paris without postage. Pilot projects for ECTS credit transfer expand, making it easier to say that a semester in another country counts, truly counts. For graduation at home, research frameworks tie consortia together. Materials science here, telemedicine there. Networks of excellence form in a map of collaborations that looks like a new constellation. Diplomacy and security. Architecture instead of barricades. In February, leaders of Czechoslovakia, Hungary and Poland meet at Visegrad, promising to coordinate reforms and Western integration. A quiet alliance of homework and horizons. By July, the Warsaw Pact dissolves. The end of a military sentence half a continent long, replaced by smaller, more careful paragraphs about partnership and reform. Through the year, the European community negotiates in Maastricht, settling the text for a union treaty, monetary union targets, common citizenship, new pillars of cooperation. The shape of tomorrow, drawn with patient pens in December. On the Baltic shores, republics assert independence more clearly. And after a failed coup in Moscow in August, recognition gathers momentum. Embassies prepare plaques, currencies and stamps are designed, and Europe learns new names with old histories. In the Balkans, federations fray, declarations are made, brief wars begin, monitors and mediators fly in, and the community attempts the difficult art of de-escalation. Early lessons in a conflict that will demand more in the years ahead. Farther south and east, the Gulf War opens and closes within the first months. European air crews and ships play their parts. Governments coordinate sanctions. Humanitarian aid routes open for displaced families. And the continent returns to the work of repair and planning. Media, culture, and the everyday network. The media program launches to support training, development, and distribution in the audio-visual world. Independent producers find funds for risky stories, and film schools add modules about markets, not just cameras. Satellite dishes bloom on balconies, cross-border channels multiply, and viewers discover foreign newscasts they keep on quietly in the background while cooking. Record shops lean into the compact disc, home stereos learn to sound clean, and small studios master without hiss. On city streets, ATMs and bank cards feel ordinary. barcode scanners, speed queues, and supermarkets trial simple loyalty databases, data as memory for retail. In alpine ice, hikers find a body that is not of this time, preserved in snow and silence. And laboratories begin to learn from a person who walked a very old Europe. Threads of archaeology stitched with genetics and climate science. Britain and its neighbours. Recession, regulation, and steady hands. Recession digs into the UK. Interest rates and unemployment numbers argue with households. Yet regulation and infrastructure tick forward. Airspace management improves. Telecom competition expands. And the newly empowered HFEA begins overseeing fertility and embryology with careful rules. Research balanced with ethics. Clinics with registers and audits rather than legends and guesswork. Across the Nordics, state IT programs computerize more services. Tax filings and registries modernize. Municipalities learn that a well-run database is a public service as real as a road. On the Iberian Peninsula, motorways extend. Factories in auto corridors add shifts. And export lists grow longer and more confident. The texture of change. In homes and offices, office suites become familiar. Spreadsheets practice compound interest more often than poetry. And slide presentations visit meeting rooms with new clip art confidence. In kitchens, small screens display teletext, weather maps and train delays, while the evening news shows new flags and calm speeches about integration. Eastern shops stock wider choices. Repair kiosks learn new part numbers, and service manuals are read with a dictionary within reach. People sleep a little easier, not because there is no trouble, but because the tools to face tomorrow feel slightly better made. A quiet closing. So 1991 folds itself away, with ERS-1 mapping seas, with a web server humming in Switzerland, with a GSM call walking from tower to tower, with ice trains keeping time, with classrooms that speak more languages, with factories that measure twice and cut once. Treaties move from draft to final. Institutions replace improvisation. And a continent learns that progress is often the sound of ventilation in a lab, or the whisper of a modem, or the whir of a lathe cutting to tolerance. We will leave the year here. Tools put down. Lights dimmed. Calendars turned. When you're ready, we'll open 1992, quietly, and carry on. A soft map of the year. The continent wakes to practical work. Treaties on desks, surveys in the field, code in small offices, cranes above stations. It is a year of structures, of standards, of systems that will run quietly, long after the headlines have faded. Across Europe, laboratories hum, students cross borders for study, industries tune to new rules, and maps gain more arrows than walls. Maastricht, the single market, and a lesson in currencies in winter. Leaders sign a treaty in a Dutch city by the river, a charter for a closer union, common citizenship, shared policies, and a road toward monetary union with careful milestones. The single market program nears its finish line. Product standards align. Services are prepared to move more freely. Customs barriers thin to software and data, and supply chains rehearse a new rhythm. But markets test every promise, and in late summer and early autumn, exchange rate mechanisms come under pressure. Some currencies widen their bands. One leaves the dance. and treasuries learn again that integration is patience as well as policy. By year's end, the direction remains. A European economy built on interoperability, on mutual recognition, and on calm arithmetic, science and space, Earth observed, skies mapped, ideas linked high above the poles. ERS-1 circles steadily, its radar painting coasts and ice, measuring winds and waves, giving engineers and planners a precise memory of water and land. Over the ocean, a Franco-American mission begins to listen to sea level with centimeter care, currents and eddies drawn like fine threads, a map of the moving planet useful to ships, to weather services, to coastal cities planning their future. On a long arc past Jupiter, Ulysses takes a gravity handshake and turns its path toward the sun's high latitudes. A European curiosity bound for data no one has held before. In Geneva, detectors at a great circular collider register particle decays with patience. Thousands of events to test the standard model. Physics advanced by statistics and quiet calibration. In quiet rooms at CERN, the World Wide Web grows from project to practice. Servers installed. Simple pages linked. Universities across the continent mirror software. And a photograph on a lab machine becomes one of the first images to travel as light across the net. Trivial to some, historic to others. Across Europe, computer science departments host talks about hypertext and protocols. Librarians pilot digital catalogs, and campus networks adopt TCP/IP by default rather than experiment. Astronomers announce the first confirmed exoplanets around a distant pulsar. A reminder that method and patience can find worlds even in unlikely places, and that Europe's scientists, scattered across institutes and collaborations, are part of a quieter golden age of measurement, computing and communications. GSM spreads. The first short message, digital mobile networks expand cell by cell. From Nordic forests to Mediterranean ports, base stations blink to life. SIM cards become small, important rectangles, and roaming becomes less a miracle than a service. In December, a simple line of text travels over a network designed for voice, a seasonal greeting, proof that signaling channels can carry words, and that tiny messages will someday share the system with everything else we say. Switch rooms learn new codecs. Billing systems learn new logics. Regulators refine interconnection terms. And handset designers slim radios into shapes that belong in pockets rather than briefcases. On desks, Unix workstations hum, and PCs multiply with faster chips and more memory. Spreadsheets feed graphs into presentations, and office suites make meetings more visual than verbal. In Helsinki, a small graphical web browser written by students shows that links can be clicked rather than typed. In Amsterdam, a regional internet registry takes shape to allocate addresses fairly, and a pan-European backbone connects national research networks into a lattice where physics data and philosophy essays travel with equal courtesy. A young Linux grows rapidly on mailing lists. SUSE is founded in Germany to support Unix systems, and a European habit of pragmatic open-source engineering quietly takes root. Energy and environment, rules for living well with machines. Ministries write and pass a habitats directive, a framework for protecting landscapes and species. the seed of a continental network of conserved places that will one day be mapped in classrooms and guidebooks alike. A new life program funds practical environmental projects, wetlands restored, wastewater treated, small pilot plants tested for cleaner industry, evidence replacing slogans, utilities expand combined cycle gas projects, dispatchable and efficient, while district heating networks are insulated and modernized, and building codes edge upward in ambition. Wind turbines step from test fields to small farms and coasts. Grid codes adapt. Maintenance crews learn blade and gearbox routines. And the idea of dispersed generation becomes respectable engineering rather than curiosity. Transport and infrastructure, fast lines, long wings, deep tunnels, rails are polished for speed, signalling rooms refitted, and on the Iberian Peninsula, a bright new high-speed line opens between capital and south, a showcase for punctual engineering and the value of straight track. Across the continent, interoperability is the word. Designers sketch pan-European control systems for trains. Standards committees compare notes. And drivers learn new cab displays with gentle confidence. Under the channel, concrete is cured. Track is laid. Catenary strung. Safety systems tested. And two countries begin to think of a sea not as a barrier, but as a timetable. At a southern factory, a long-range twin-engine airliner takes its first flight. A quiet proof of aerodynamic patience and modern avionics. And a sign that Europe's aerospace collaboration has become a habit rather than an experiment. On launch pads near the equator, a dependable rocket family lifts satellites for television, weather, and data. The sky made thick with services that feel like ordinary life on the ground. Industry and manufacturing. Retooling for rules that are coming. Automakers tune engines and catalysts to meet new emission standards that start next year. Test benches run long cycles. And suppliers refine sensors and control units so that fuel and air behave like partners rather than strangers. Machine tool builders add precision once reserved for laboratories. CNC logic spreads, scrap rates fall, and quality becomes something measured continuously rather than inspected at the end. Pharmaceutical firms expand capacity for new therapies. Biotechnology spin-outs from universities license enzymes and antibodies. And manufacturing suites learn how to be clean, documented, and repeatable. In the East, privatization and investment continue. Training lines teach robotics and PLCS. Service manuals are translated, and factories relearn themselves under new owners, not fast, but forward. A development bank funds practical modernizations, from grain silos to glass plants, from municipal water to small business credit, with conditions that teach governance as well as accounting, education and research. Mobility becomes ordinary. Erasmus exchanges grow. Dormitories fill with many languages, and buses to airports carry textbooks and cheap luggage. Tempus projects modernize curricula in Central and Eastern Europe. Economics adds markets and models. Law schools teach commercial codes. Engineering departments get labs that match their partners in the West. And deans discover that cooperation can be a budget line, not a miracle. Credit transfer pilots expand. A common language for semesters and modules takes shape, and students begin to expect that a term abroad will count fully at home. Research frameworks fund consortia that would have been pen friends in another era. Materials science here, telemedicine there. Environmental modelling that uses new satellite data. And networked HPC centres sharing workloads over that fresh backbone with more confidence each month. In the Baltics, state building enters a practical phase. An Estonian currency returns. Central banks train staff. Universities rebuild faculties and research councils. And schools add language tracks that point outward as well as inward. In Czechoslovakia, elections set different courses in the two republics. Parliaments and lawyers prepare a peaceful constitutional solution for a new year. And universities plan how to separate budgets without tearing departments. Diplomacy and security. Institutions over improvisation. Early in the year, European states recognize new neighbours on the Adriatic, and the old federation frays into conflict. Monitors and mediators fly to meetings. Peacekeepers establish corridors and checkpoints. And humanitarian supply chains practice the hard art of neutral logistics. The CSCE strengthens itself at a summit, adding offices and instruments for conflict prevention, minority questions, and election observation. A continent choosing architecture over ad hoc answers. Across capitals, Maastricht moves from signatures to ratification campaigns, debates in parliaments and on doorsteps, referendums that are close, margins teaching humility, concessions and protocols added to help a cautious public step forward. Defense establishments write new doctrines for a post-Cold War map. Smaller, more mobile forces, more joint work, and a habit of seeing security as law, economy, and energy as much as uniforms and runways, media, culture, and a summer of light. In Seville, pavilions open for an exposition that treats technology as a kind of optimism. Exhibits about energy, materials, space, and countless small conversations that carry home new ideas for labs and classrooms. In Barcelona, the Olympics become a festival of urban renewal, transport and waterfronts polished. The world's cameras watching a city that turned planning into a decade-long project. And young Europeans discover sports they will try in school next term. In Sweden, a football championship ends with a Danish team holding a cup they were not expected to lift. A gentle reminder that systems leave room for surprises. Satellite dishes on balconies multiply. Broadcasters use new capacity for news, learning, and music. And families explore a wider menu of languages and late-night documentaries. Britain and neighbours. Institutions steady the day in spring. Voters in Britain return a government with a modest majority. Policy becomes incremental rather than dramatic. And through the year, the island wrestles with exchange rate pressures that will peak and pass in public view. Meanwhile, regulators continue to open telecom markets carefully. Research councils fund collaborations that plug into Europe's frameworks, and laboratories at Culham refine fusion control and diagnostics, science that moves by millimeters and milliseconds, but moves. Across the Nordics, public services add databases that actually talk to each other. Tax and population registers modernize, and small municipalities provide digital convenience that will feel normal to everyone else a few years later. On the Iberian Peninsula, motorways and logistics parks expand. Exporters learn new customs software, and engineering schools feed graduates directly into modernized assembly lines. Everyday life. The texture of change ATMs hum without ceremony. Bank cards buy groceries in more villages, and barcode scanners speed the evening queue. Modems sing. Email becomes a habit for graduate students, and a few brave offices try electronic document sharing that works if everyone remembers the right file name. In eastern cities, shop windows fill with unfamiliar brands. Repair counters learn new part numbers, and pharmacists keep translated leaflets behind the till. A student in Prague downloads a paper from Paris. An engineer in Turin pulls satellite wind data for a design study. A teacher in Cork prepares a lesson about protected habitats using a fresh directive and a borrowed overhead projector. Ordinary Europe, louder in meetings than in squares, quieter in labs than in speeches, but moving. A quiet closing. So 1992 folds itself away, with ERS-1 mapping coasts, with TOPEX/Poseidon listening to the sea, with Ulysses set on a high latitude path, with a web that now has places to visit, with GSM networks making room for tiny messages, with trains and airliners proving that distance can be negotiated by design. Treaties move toward ratification, standards become habits, and students carry new languages and new friends into the next semester. We will leave the year here, tools put down, lights dimmed, calendars turned. When you're ready, we'll open 1993, quietly, and carry on. 1993, the year Europe chose structure. A soft map of the year. The continent wakes to systems, treaties crossing finish lines, standards leaving committee rooms and entering factories, cables and rails that make distance feel smaller. It is not a year of spectacle, it is a year of structure, and structure lasts. Europe's architecture, markets, money, and the Union itself. On the 1st of January, the single market is no longer a plan. It's the morning routine. Lorries roll through simpler checkpoints. Customs become software and statistics. And supply chains learn a calmer rhythm. Currencies still test nerves. Through the summer, the exchange rate mechanism stretches. Bands widen to keep the dance going. And treasuries discover that patience is a tool as real as a calculator. In June, leaders agree in Copenhagen on clear accession criteria. Democracy, law, market economy. A simple list that will guide applications from east to west. On the 1st of November, the treaty signed the year before enters into force, and the European Union becomes a present tense. Citizenship pages printed, institutions fitted with new rooms, and committees that once met separately learn to share agendas, science and space, repairing eyes, mapping Earth, refining matter. In December, astronauts fit new optics to a great space telescope, turning blurred stars into precise points, a gift to astronomers on both sides of the Atlantic, and a quiet vindication for engineers who believed in careful correction. Over the poles, ERS-1 keeps watch, radar drawing coasts, ice and waves, a steady archive for ports, insurers and climate modelers. On a long path toward the sun's high latitudes, Ulysses cruises, instruments healthy, teams rehearsing for a vantage no one has had before. Underground near Geneva, detectors at a circular collider measure the known with exquisite care. precision tests of the standard model, proofs built from statistics, calibration, and patience rather than surprise. In spring, CERN places the World Wide Web software into the public domain, a simple legal act that opens a very large door. Servers appear on campus networks, pages link to pages, and Europe's labs become early waypoints for a quieter kind of traffic. Across the year, ocean altimetry from a new satellite pair continues. Sea level read like music on staff paper. Currents mapped for weather, shipping, and science. Computing and communications. The net grows. Mobiles learn to roam in universities and research centres. TCP/IP becomes default, not an experiment. Mail lists and FTP servers feel routine. And a few brave browsers add pictures to pages without ceremony. In a small Scottish lab, an early web search prototype crawls and indexes, hinting that finding will soon matter as much as linking. Open systems flourish. A young Linux gathers drivers and file systems. Sysadmins test it on spare machines, while Unix workstations and PCs share desks with growing confidence. GSM networks spread across borders. More operators launch. SIM cards become pocket essentials. Roaming works in practice. And messages that began as engineering tests start to look like a service people might actually use. Switch rooms adopt new codecs. Billing grows a continental grammar. And standards groups sketch variants that will later fit dense cities. All of it careful. All of it cumulative. Transport and infrastructure, fast lines, deep tunnels, long wings, high-speed rail adds new links. Signalling rooms glow with interoperable plans, and travel times shorten by design rather than luck. Under the channel, concrete cures, rails align, catenary hums in test sections, and evacuation drills rehearse what everyone hopes never to need. Engineering becoming habit. In the air, a long-range twin-engine airliner continues flight test work. Avionics refined, structures verified. A collaboration that turns drawings into routes on airline maps. At a tropical launch site, dependable Ariane rockets lift television, weather, and data satellites, making the sky an extension of fibre and coax on the ground. Energy and environment, rules that shape machines and landscapes. Environmental policy takes a programmatic form. A multi-year action plan pushes cleaner industry, better cities, and protected places. While the Habitats framework signed earlier begins to map a continent-wide network of conservation sites. Utilities keep building combined cycle gas capacity. Efficient and dispatchable, district heating modernizes, and building codes edge forward. The quiet arithmetic of saved kilowatt hours. On coasts and fields, wind grows from curiosity to contract. Grid codes adapt. Maintenance teams learn blade and gearbox work, and spreadsheets begin to treat wind as a resource rather than a rumour. Industry and manufacturing, retooling under new standards. Automakers calibrate engines and catalysts for stricter emissions. Sensors and control units become mainstream, and crash labs turn data into safer shells. Machine tool builders push CNC deeper into mid-sized firms. Precision spreads, scrap falls, and quality becomes continuous rather than episodic. Pharmaceutical plants validate clean rooms and processes. Biotech spin-outs, license enzymes, diagnostics, and antibodies. And regulators sketch the blueprint for a pan-European medicines agency, so approvals can be more uniform and faster without losing caution. In the East, privatization and new ownership continue. Manuals are translated, PLC training lines multiply, and shop floors relearn themselves under different flags in accounting, education and research. Mobility and networks Erasmus grows. Dorms and canteens buzz with many languages, and credit recognition becomes more predictable. The ECTS pilots no longer feel like pilots. Tempest projects refresh curricula in Central and Eastern Europe. Economics with markets and money. Law with company and competition. Engineering with labs that match partners to the West. Framework research funds pull consortia across borders. Material science here, telemedicine there. Environmental modelling fed by new satellites. And networked computing centres share loads with a competence that would have seemed ambitious just 2 years ago. In the Baltics, state building enters everyday detail. Lats and liters return. Central banks settle procedures. Universities rebuild faculties and peer review. And schools add language tracks that point outward. Diplomacy and security. Institutions over improvisation. The union settles into its new powers. Parliaments ratify, amend, and explain. And skeptical publics are met with patient details rather than slogans. In the Balkans, conflict deepens, monitors and mediators shuttle. Humanitarian supply chains practice neutral logistics. And Europe learns how hard it is to keep peace where maps and loyalties grind. The CSCE toolkit grows. Early warning, minority rights, election observation. A belief that prevention is cheaper than repair, and that law can be a kind of armour if worn consistently. Media, culture, daily technology. Satellite channels multiply on balconies. Households discover foreign news at dinner. Late-night documentaries, language lessons, and quiet music. Public broadcasters add teletext services tied to the new single market. Prices and jobs and study programs. Information as a public utility. In Britain, rail policy rewrites begin. Infrastructure and operations prepared for separation, signalling that management will soon matter as much as mileage. Museums and expos treat technology as a calm optimism. School groups file through halls about energy, materials, and space. Notebooks filling with sketches that will become degree choices a few years from now. Everyday life, the texture of change. ATMs and bank cards feel ordinary. Barcode scanners shorten queues, and shop systems quietly learn what sells where. Modems sing. Email becomes a habit beyond computer science, and a handful of offices test shared servers for documents, with file names that must be remembered exactly. In eastern cities, shop windows widen, service counters learn new part numbers, and pharmacists keep translated leaflets behind the till. Families plan weekend trips across softer borders. Students book exchanges with less paperwork, and a teacher somewhere prints a map of protected habitats for Monday's lesson. A quiet closing. So 1993 folds itself away, with a union in force, with Hubble's sharp eye restored, with ERS one steady over ice and coast, with the web opened for anyone to build on, with GSM roaming turning into a habit rather than a headline, with rails and tunnels that make geography negotiable. We will leave the year here, tools put down, lights dimmed, calendars turned. When you're ready, we'll open 1994, quietly and carry on. 1994, the year Europe connected. The DOTS institutions take shape. Standards leave committee rooms and enter factories. Networks become ordinary rather than experimental. Across Europe, the morning feels practical. Timetables tighten. Servers hum. Research money moves with clearer rules. And borders behave more like agreements than fences. Europe's architecture, markets, money, and a wider room. On the 1st of January, the European Economic Area comes alive. The single market stretches to EFTA partners. Goods, services, capital, and people move more freely between most of the Union and the Nordics. In Frankfurt, the European Monetary Institute begins work. Central bankers compare notes and systems, the precursor to a future central bank, learning the continent's varied rhythms. In June, accession treaties are signed with Austria, Finland, and Sweden. The paperwork of enlargement ready. And in November, referendums say yes in Sweden and Finland, while Norway says no. Integration advancing by consent, country by country. Through the year, Framework Programme 4 for research begins. Multi-year funding that ties labs and industries across borders. Collaborative science turning from hope to habit. Science in space, eyes repaired, seas measured. A polar sun early in the year. The Great Space Telescope shows sharp images at last. European astronomers join colleagues in turning corrected optics into catalogues. Galaxies and nebulae crisp and calm. High above the poles. ERS-1 keeps its radar watch. Ice, waves, and coastlines recorded for climate work and engineering. And across the Atlantic, a joint altimetry mission reads sea level like stave lines. Centimeters that matter to ships, to weather, to cities at the water's edge. On a long arc, Ulysses reaches its first solar polar observations. Instruments quietly listening where no spacecraft listened before. Data that will feed patient papers for years. In Grenoble, the European synchrotron radiation facility opens to users. Bright beams for protein structures, advanced materials, and industrial process studies. A tool that turns precision into progress. And in autumn, Euromir 94 places a European on Mir for weeks. Experiments in microgravity. A reminder that some questions need a heartbeat in orbit to be answered well. Computing and communications. Browsers, backbones. And roaming. The web grows from hobby to habit. W3C is founded to shepherd its standards, and universities mirror software as campus networks adopt TCP/IP by default. In London, a neutral exchange point lets networks peer without fuss. Traffic stays local, performance improves, and the idea spreads to other capitals. A small team in Norway shapes a lightweight browser. Proof that Europe will not only consume the web, it will write it. On desks, Unix workstations and faster PCs share offices. Spreadsheets feed graphs into presentations. And email leaves computer science departments for the rest of campus. Across the air, GSM cells multiply. Roaming works between more countries. And short text messages move from engineering trick to quiet service. Billing systems and standards groups keeping pace with enthusiasm on the street. Transport and infrastructure, fast rails. A tunnel becomes a timetable. Under the sea between Folkestone and Coquelle, the Channel Tunnel opens formally in May. Late in the year, Eurostar passenger services begin. And freight and shuttle operations turn a map's blue line into a line in a diary. High-speed corridors in France, Germany, Spain, and Italy add links and capacity. Signaling and power systems grow more interoperable. And travel time shrinks because engineers agree on details. In the air, Airbus A330 enters service. Long-range, efficient. A collaboration that puts new routes onto airline maps. And Europe's aerospace partnership looks normal rather than novel. At a tropical launch site, Ariane 4 continues its calm cadence. Television, weather, and data satellites ride to orbit. The sky becoming an extension of cable and fiber, energy and environment. Rules that shape machines and habits. The UN Climate Convention enters into force. European ministries align inventories and targets. Efficiency programs gain budgets rather than slogans. At year's end, a packaging and waste directive sets recycling and recovery rules. Producers plan lighter materials and take-back schemes. Municipal systems begin to modernize sorting and collection. Wind projects move from curiosity to contract. Grid codes are refined. Maintenance crews learn blade work and gearbox care. And the arithmetic of kilowatt hours saved becomes as respectable as kilowatt hours generated. District heating networks tighten insulation. Combined cycle gas projects expand. And building codes climb a small, steady step. Industry and manufacturing. Standards inside the machine. Automakers calibrate engines and catalysts for the standards now in force. Side impact safety improves. Airbags spread beyond luxury, and crash labs turn data into quieter cabins. Machine tool builders push CNC deeper into mid-sized firms. Precision rises, scrap falls. Tolerances become culture rather than inspection. Pharmaceutical plants validate clean rooms and processes. Biotech spin-outs transfer enzymes and diagnostics to production. Regulators finish the last steps toward a pan-European medicines agency opening next year. Approvals prepared to be faster and more uniform without losing caution. In Germany, the Eurofighter prototype flies. Avionics, structures, and control laws begin their long conversation. Industry investment that pays back in skills as much as in aircraft. Education and research. Mobility as routine. Erasmus exchanges expand. Credit transfer grows predictable. And the Socrates and Leonardo education and training lines are prepared for launch. Schools and polytechnics planning language and vocational exchanges that match university mobility. In Central and Eastern Europe, Tempus modernizes curricula. Engineering labs are upgraded. Economics programs teach models that speak to markets. And joint degrees tie deans to colleagues they once knew only by journal footnotes. National backbones stitch themselves to European ones. Shared supercomputing time becomes a real option, and researchers treat the network as a lab tool rather than a novelty. Medicine and public health. Quiet systems that save lives. Hospitals install more MRI and CT capacity. Picture archiving pilots expand. And telemedicine trials move from demonstration to scheduled service between regional centres and small hospitals. In Britain, a national organ donor register begins. Health informatics quietly building the lists that let operating rooms work with less delay and more dignity. Public health surveillance strengthens across borders. Labs coordinate reference testing. And early warning bulletins become timelier and less theatrical. Diplomacy and security. architecture over improvisation. Many European states joined Partnership for Peace, linking militaries by exercise and doctrine rather than by alliance alone. Practical cooperation replacing slogans. In the Balkans, conflict continues. Humanitarian corridors, sanctions regimes, and monitoring missions practice the hard craft of neutral logistics. Lessons that will shape Europe's crisis tools for years. Data protection drafts advance. Privacy shifting from principle to practicable law. A sign that the single market must carry rights as carefully as it carries goods. Media, culture. A northern winter of light. In Lillehammer, the Winter Games show how well an event can blend design, landscape, and logistics. Transport clean and frequent. Broadcasting graceful. And a generation of children sees winter sports they will try the next term at school. Digital television standards under the DVB project mature. Satellite profiles agreed. Manufacturers and broadcasters align. And the living room future is specified before it is sold. On a quiet day in Ardèche, a cave is found. Art from deep time. And archaeologists begin a patient collaboration with conservators, geologists, and imaging specialists. Science moving with reverence as well as curiosity. Everyday life. The texture of connection, ATMs and bank cards feel universal. Barcode scanners shorten queues, and shop systems learn, gently, what sells where. Modems sing. Email reaches beyond campus. A few newspapers post daily editions on the web. And families explore one or two foreign channels over a small dish on a balcony. Trains run a little faster. Flights a little farther. And a tunnel under the sea turns two capitals into neighbours who share a timetable rather than a ferry. A quiet closing. So 1994 folds itself away, with an EEA that widens the single market, with an EMI learning the grammar of a shared currency, with Hubble sharp, ERS1 steady, Ulysses listening over the sun, with browsers and exchange points wiring offices and dorms, with Eurostar timetables printed next to Ariane launch logs. We will leave the year here, tools put down, lights dimmed, calendars turned. When you're ready, we'll open 1995, quietly, and carry on. 1995, the year networks found their voice, a year when Europe tightened its frameworks. Laboratories opened new eyes. Factories retuned their instruments. Classrooms widened their windows to the world. And the global news carried moments we still remember. Institutions mature. Borders behave more like agreements than fences. Standards leave committee rooms and enter machines. Across Europe, tunnels become timetables. Servers hum in libraries. Students cross borders with predictable credits. And the idea of connection moves from promise to habit. Europe's architecture, enlargement, movement, and rules for the data age. On the 1st of January, Austria, Finland, and Sweden joined the European Union. A wider single market at breakfast. New flags in Brussels by lunch. In Frankfurt, the European Monetary Institute settles into its second year. Central banks rehearsing the grammar of a future currency. Statistics and systems learning to agree. On 26th March, the Schengen Convention begins for its first wave of states. Interior border checks lift. Morning trains are quieter at the frontier. And a shared information system learns to carry responsibility as well as convenience. In October, the Data Protection Directive is adopted. a rulebook for personal information, rights to access and correct, duties for those who hold it, a patient foundation for the digital decade. The European Medicines Evaluation Agency opens in London, science tied to procedure, approvals that move faster and more uniformly, caution preserved by method rather than delay, science and space, new worlds, new eyes, new maps. A small team in Switzerland announces a planet around a sun-like star, 51 Pegasi b, a soft, steady wobble in starlight becoming a world, and a new field leaping from theory to observation. In Boulder, physicists cool rubidium atoms until they share a single quantum state, the first Bose-Einstein condensate, matter behaving like one careful note, a future of sensors and precision hinted at in a quiet lab. High above the poles, ERS-2 joins its older sibling, ERS, 1 ... twin radars mapping ice ... coast ... and wave ... a wider archive for climate, shipping, and engineering ... In November, Europe launches the Infrared Space Observatory, a cold telescope for warm dust, star-forming clouds and faint galaxies. Light we cannot see turned into knowledge we can share. In December, SOHO departs for a steady vantage on the sun, a joint European-American sentinel to listen for storms, to study the star that sets our clocks. The Hubble telescope, repaired in 1993, delivers crisp images that become familiar to classrooms. Pillars of gas in a distant nebula, clusters with blue stars sharp against dark, science turning into posters above study desks. Across the year, Galileo threads past Io and arrives at Jupiter in December. A probe plunges into cloud. Instruments send back numbers until the atmosphere keeps them. Patience rewarded after a long arc through space. On Earth, a bright comet is noticed by 2 amateur eyes. Hale-Bopp. Far away still, but a reminder that discovery also belongs to those who look up from back gardens, computing and communications. The web leaves the lab, and phones learn to roam browsers spread from universities into offices and homes. W3C tends the standards, and campus networks adopt TCP/IP by default. A young Californian company takes its browser public, an energetic IPO that signals a new appetite for networks and helps lure talent into code rather than cubicles. Windows 95 arrives with a new desktop rhythm, the start button becoming a habit, and a bundled browser stepping into the race. At Sun, Java is introduced for portable code, small applets dancing inside pages. Write once becoming an ambition, teams will chase for years. At Netscape, LiveScript is born and quickly renamed JavaScript, a lightweight language for making pages breathe, soon to live in almost every browser. Open source servers organize themselves into the Apache group, practical patches turning into a dependable web engine. Sysadmins finding a common home. New names arrive quietly. An online bookstore opens its doors. A small auction site starts in a living room. A speedy search engine appears in December. Proof that the net will become catalogue, marketplace, and memory. Across Europe, GSM cells multiply. Roaming works in practice, and short messages step from engineering trick to quiet service. Billing systems and standards keeping pace with enthusiasm on the street. In Scandinavia and Britain, handset makers refine compact designs. Battery chemistry improves, and pockets learn to carry a dial tone without ceremony. energy and environment, policy with a screwdriver in its pocket. In Berlin, the first UN climate conference assembles, the Berlin Mandate setting a course toward binding reductions. Engineers and economists handed a timeline rather than a slogan. Member states expand efficiency programs. Building codes tighten. Combined cycle gas plants add capacity. And district heating networks are insulated and metered with more care. On coasts and ridges, wind projects step from pilot to contract. Grid codes update. Crews learn blade and gearbox routines. And spreadsheets treat wind as a resource rather than a rumour. Transport and infrastructure, tunnels to timetables. Rails that agree, the Channel Tunnel moves from grand opening to ordinary service. Eurostar and shuttle schedules settle. Freight paths are traded like promises. And two capitals feel 1 hour closer without moving an inch. High-speed corridors in France, Germany, Spain, and Italy add segments. Signalling grows more interoperable. And the idea of a European train control language takes clearer form. In the air, the A330 enters broader service, a long-range twin that makes new routes pencil out. Avionics and composites turning drawings into reliable distance. At a tropical launch site, Ariane 4 keeps its calm cadence. Television, weather, and data ride to orbit, the sky becoming an extension of fibre and coax on the ground. Industry and manufacturing. Standards inside the machine. Automakers calibrate for tighter emission norms, arriving in stages. Sensors and control units become standard. And crash labs refine safer shells with quieter cabins. Machine tool builders push CNC deeper into mid-sized firms. Scrap falls, tolerances become culture rather than inspection. Pharmaceutical plants validate clean rooms and batch records. Biotech spin out scale enzymes and diagnostics. And the new EMEA gives regulators and companies a common table. Faster pathways without losing caution. Northern handset firms grow with GSM. Supply chains learn miniaturization. And Europe's design language becomes thin, robust, and battery-minded. Education and research. Mobility that feels normal. Erasmus exchanges expand. ECTS, credit transfer, becomes predictable, and the Socrates and Leonardo da Vinci programs pick up pace. Languages and vocational skills planned with checklists rather than improvisation. University backbones stitch themselves to European ones. Shared supercomputing time becomes practical, and research consortia move datasets as easily as they move draft papers. In Central and Eastern Europe, Tempus keeps curricular reforms on schedule. Engineering labs are upgraded. Economics courses learn market models. And deans compare notes with partners they once knew only by journal footnotes. In the Baltics, institutions bed in, currencies steady. Central banks and statistics offices refine their craft, and schools add outward-facing language tracks that feel less like novelty and more like preparation. Medicine and public health. Measured advances. Hospitals install additional MRI and CT capacity. Radiology moves from event to routine. And pilot telemedicine links between regional centres and small hospitals shift from demonstration to scheduling. In late year, the first HIV protease inhibitor approvals begin. Combination therapy is on the horizon, and clinics prepare protocols that will change outcomes through method rather than miracle. Across Europe, surveillance for animal and human disease strengthens. Labs coordinate reference testing, and early warning bulletins trade drama for clarity. Diplomacy and security, institutions over improvisation, and a hard summer in the Balkans. The year is not only laboratories and standards. In July, a Bosnian enclave falls. Thousands are killed. The continent realizes how much work remains between maps and safety. Through autumn, diplomacy intensifies. And in November-December, the Dayton agreements are reached and initialed. A road to ceasefire, to interposition forces, to painstaking reconstruction. Elsewhere, Northern Ireland's process moves in difficult steps. Frameworks drafted, trust counted like coins, and the habit of dialogue preserved even when headlines tempt fatigue. On January 1st, the World Trade Organization begins. Trade rules wrapped in a single home. Disputes given courts, not press conferences. And technology, pharmaceuticals, and services pulled under a clearer law of motion. In Japan, January brings the Kobe earthquake. Urban infrastructure tested. Engineers and volunteers proving that response is a science as well as a kindness. In March, a sarin attack on the Tokyo subway shocks the world. Emergency medicine and policing learn new checklists. And cities revise how they think about ordinary mornings. In April, a bombing in Oklahoma City darkens the news far from Europe. Emergency response, building codes, and public security are re-examined. And broadcasters learn again to balance vigilance with care. Media, culture, law on the pitch, signals on the balcony. The Bosman ruling in December makes freedom of movement fully real for European footballers. Contracts and transfers rewritten by the principles of the single market. Club strategies and youth systems reshaped for a generation. DVB digital television standards mature. Satellite profiles settle. Manufacturers and broadcasters align. And living rooms inch toward a clearer picture. A game console arrives formally in Europe. Real-time 3D in the lounge. A new grammar for play that will spill into design studios and universities. Blending art, math, and silicon. CDs and early MP3 players share space with radios. Real audio streams a thin thread of live sound over dial-up. And public broadcasters launch their first cautious web pages. Schedules and articles in a new format for a new habit. Everyday life. The texture of connection, ATMs and bank cards feel universal. Barcode scanners shorten queues. And shop systems quietly learn what sells where. Modems sing. Email reaches beyond campus. Small offices try shared servers and long file names. And families explore one or two foreign channels over a dish on the balcony. At stations and airports, signage improves. Timetables are printed with a tunnel under the sea as if it were a bridge. And weekend plans include places that used to feel farther away than they really were. A quiet closing. So 1995 folds itself away, with Schengen gates open for their first travellers, with a data protection rulebook for the digital age, with ERS2, ISO, and SOHO watching ice, dust, and the sun, with an exoplanet tugging at its star, with a condensate whispering new physics, with a web that now has places to visit, with GSM phones roaming and tiny messages learning to belong. The news carried hard moments this year, and yet the work of clinics, classrooms, factories and labs continued, quietly, effectively, turning difficulty into procedure and procedure into progress. We will leave the year here, tools put down, lights dimmed, calendars turned. When you're ready, we'll open 1996 quietly and carry on. 1996, the year networks became daily life. A year when Europe deepened its frameworks. Laboratories opened new paths. Factories retuned their instruments. Classrooms widened their windows. And the world carried events we still remember. Institutions mature. Borders behave more like agreements than fences. Standards leave committee rooms and enter machines. Across Europe, tunnels become timetables. Phones learn to travel. Servers hum in libraries. And the idea of connection turns from promise into habit. Europe's architecture, movement, markets, and rules for power and data. The single market settles into routine. Customs handled by software. Supply chains planned across borders without drama. In Frankfurt, the European Monetary Institute rehearses the grammar of a future currency. Statistics and systems learning to agree. Convergence measured week by week. Schengen expands its practice. Interior checks ease where systems are ready. Morning trains grow quieter at the frontier. Police cooperation tools learn to carry responsibility as well as convenience. In December, the Electricity Market Directive is adopted, unbundling wires from watts, opening access step by step, bringing competition to a sector once defined by monopolies. The data protection rulebook begins to bite. Ministries and firms appoint officers. Citizens gain clearer rights over their information. And the digital decade receives a careful spine of law, science and space, comets, planets, and hard lessons in orbit, in late winter and spring. Comet Hyakutake slips close to Earth, a bright, silent visitor. Observatories across Europe measure tails and chemistry, and families notice the sky with a kind of old familiarity. In Switzerland, astronomers refine techniques for detecting exoplanets, a field that leapt forward last year, and now gathers candidates with patient precision. In August, a Martian meteorite is reported to carry suggestive shapes, a claim that stirs imaginations and arguments, and reminds laboratories that extraordinary findings must survive extraordinary care. In June, the maiden flight of Ariane 5 fails shortly after launch. Europe loses 4 cluster research spacecraft, and engineers turn grief into work, software audited, guidance logic rewritten, a program rebuilt with the stubborn courage that good engineering requires. Later in the year, Mars Global Surveyor and Mars Pathfinder are launched toward the red planet. Mapping and a small rover planned for the year ahead. Europe's scientists prepare to join the harvest of data. SOHO settles into position to watch the sun. And the Infrared Space Observatory continues its quiet survey of cold dust and warm star birth. Catalogues that will feed patient papers for years. Computing and communications. The web grows up, and mobiles find their crowd across campuses and offices. TCP/IP is default, not an experiment, and browsers become ordinary on workstations and PCs. A free webmail service opens its doors, Hotmail becoming an address for millions, reachable from any terminal with patience and a dial tone. A small instant messaging program appears. ICQ teaching that a green light on a screen can mean a friend is nearby, even if nearby is another country. At the standards table, CSS gains its first recommendation. The separation of content and presentation find in a simple grammar. And a working group begins shaping a simpler XML for structured documents. Java reaches 1.0, applets dance inside pages, and the idea of portable code becomes a practical ambition, while JavaScript/JScript gives pages movement without plugins. In Europe, GSM cells densify. DCS 1800 networks bloom in cities. Roaming works across more borders, and prepaid SIMs make mobile service feel accessible to younger users and to travelers. Handset makers refine compact designs. Battery chemistry improves, and pockets learn to carry a dial tone without ceremony. Energy and environment. Climate policy with a screwdriver. The Geneva Climate Conference endorses firmer targets for the years ahead. Europe's ministries turn intent into inventory, and engineers inherit deadlines rather than slogans. Utilities add combined cycle gas capacity. District heating networks tighten insulation and metering. And building codes climb a small, steady step. On coasts and ridges, wind projects scale. Grid codes adapt. Maintenance crews learn blade and gearbox routines. And spreadsheets treat wind as a resource rather than a rumor. Water and waste directives move from paper to practice. Packaging recovery systems expand. And municipalities modernize sorting with quiet competence. Transport and infrastructure. Rails agree, tunnel to timetable. Wings with range. High-speed corridors add segments in France, Germany, Spain, and Italy. Signaling and power systems grow more interoperable, and travel times shrink because engineers agree on details. A crimson and grey service connects Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam, and Cologne. Cross-border timetables planned like choreography. And passengers discover that 4 countries can feel like one well-run line. Under the sea, the Channel Tunnel settles into ordinary excellence. Eurostar and shuttles keep time. Freight paths are traded like promises. In the air, a 319 and a 330 fleets expand. Long range made efficient. Avionics and composites turning drawings into reliable distance. At a tropical launch site, Ariane 4 continues its calm cadence. Television, weather, and data satellites ride to orbit. Sky as extension of fiber and coax. Industry and manufacturing. Standards inside the machine. Automakers calibrate engines for tighter Euro 2 emission norms. Sensors and control units become standard. And crash labs refine shells that fail gracefully rather than catastrophically. Machine tool builders push CNC deeper into mid-sized firms. Tolerances turn into culture rather than inspection, and scrap rates fall by design. Pharmaceutical plants validate clean rooms and batch records. Biotech spin-outs scale enzymes and diagnostics. And the new European Medicines Agency aligns procedures so approvals move faster without losing caution. Northern handset firms grow with GSM, supply chains learn miniaturization, and Europe's design language becomes thin, robust, and battery-minded. Education and research, mobility that feels normal. Erasmus exchanges expand. ECTS credit transfer becomes predictable. And Socrates and Leonardo carry language learning and vocational skills from brochure to budget line. In Central and Eastern Europe, Tempus keeps curricular reforms on schedule. Engineering labs are upgraded. Economics courses learn market models. and deans compare notes with partners they once knew only by journal footnotes. National research backbones stitch themselves to European ones. Shared supercomputing time becomes practical, and consortia move datasets as easily as they move draft papers. Medicine and public health, hard news, and real progress. In March, Britain announces a likely link between BOSE and a variant of CJD. Exports are banned. Abattoirs and regulators adopt strict new rules. Animal feed is reformulated. Traceability is strengthened. And food safety turns from trust into process. At the same time, HIV care changes course, with triple therapy regimens becoming standard in leading clinics, viral loads dropping, hospital wards breathing a little easier, method replacing despair. Hospitals add MRI and CT capacity, image archiving pilots expand, and telemedicine links between regional centres and small hospitals move from demonstration to scheduling. Evidence-based medicine deepens. The culture of systematic review spreads, and journals become stricter about what counts as proof. Diplomacy and security. A hard summer. Institutions over improvisation. In Northern Ireland, a ceasefire breaks early in the year. A bomb returns the conflict to headlines. Yet multi-party talks begin in summer, with procedural patience that will matter later. In Chechnya, a brutal conflict pauses with the Khasavyurt Accords. Withdrawal and negotiations agreed, civilians count the damage, and engineers begin the slow work of restoring power, water, and rails. In the Balkans, the Dayton framework moves from signatures to supervision. I4 transitions toward SF4 by year's end. Roads reopen, bridges and schools are repaired, and the habit of coordinated logistics becomes a European craft. Farther away, Atlanta hosts the Olympics. A bombing scars a night of celebration. Emergency services demonstrate that planning can limit harm, and broadcasters learn again to keep calm on a loud day. In aviation, TWA 800 is lost off the American coast. Investigators adopt a methodical, multi-year approach. Airworthiness directives follow, and Europe's regulators share findings into maintenance and wiring standards. Elsewhere, a statement from a little-known militant in Afghanistan signals a conflict that the world will learn to name later. Early signs recorded by analysts and largely ignored by the public. Media, culture, games, and signals. Law on the pitch. Euro 96 in England fills summer evenings. Football's coming home, hummed in kitchens. Germany lifts the trophy, and the Bosman ruling from last year quietly reshapes transfers and squad building. DVD players debut in Japan. Europe watches the standards settle. Broadcasters under the DVB umbrella firm up digital plans, and living rooms inch toward a clearer picture. A game console arrives in more European markets. Real-time 3D settles into lounges, and an entire generation learns spatial intuition from play that will spill into design studios and universities. Everyday life. The texture of connection, ATMs and bank cards feel universal. Barcode scanners shorten queues, and shop systems quietly learn what sells where. Modems sing, email reaches beyond campus. Small offices try shared servers and very long file names. And families explore 2 or 3 foreign channels over a dish on the balcony. At stations and airports, signage improves. Timetables are printed with a tunnel under the sea, as if it were a bridge. and weekend plans include places that used to feel farther away than they really were. A quiet closing. So 1996 folds itself away, with Schengen habits maturing, an electricity directive setting competition in motion, Hyakutake reminding us to look up, Ariane 5 teaching hard lessons that make later flights safe, SOHO and ISO observing quietly, Mars missions en route, CSS giving the web clean clothes, GSM and prepaid making phones social, BSE reforming food safety, and triple therapy turning medicine toward hope. We will leave the year here, tools put down, lights dimmed, calendars turned. When you're ready, we'll open 1997 quietly and carry on. 1997, the year Europe tightened its mesh, a year when Europe tuned its frameworks. Laboratories opened new paths, factories refined their instruments, classrooms widened their windows, and the world carried moments we still remember. Across Europe, phones learned to travel, research networks knit together, high-speed rails agree on signals, and the idea of connection turns from promise into habit. Europe's architecture, movement, markets, and law that steadies the digital age. In June, leaders sign the Amsterdam Treaty, refining how the Union works, a stronger role for Parliament, room for future enlargement, and clearer tools for justice and home affairs. Convergence toward a shared currency continues. Budgets trimmed, statistics compared. Central banks rehearse the grammar of tomorrow's money. Schengen practice deepens. Interior checks ease where systems are ready. Morning trains grow quieter at frontiers. Police cooperation tools learn to carry responsibility as well as convenience. The data protection rulebook starts to bite. Ministries and firms appoint officers. Citizens gain rights to see and correct their information. And the digital decade finds a careful spine of law. In July, Hong Kong returns to China under a one country, two systems formula. Europe watches a long colonial chapter close. Trade and legal services adjust, and universities refresh Asian studies with real-time casework. By year's end, the Ottawa Landmine Treaty opens for signature. Most European states step forward. Doctrine rewritten so that old weapons do not outlive their wars. Science and space. Comets bright. Catalogues precise. Planets confirmed through spring. Comet Hale-Bopp brightens the sky, dazzling to the eye. Instructive to observatories. Chemistry and dust tails measured by European instruments. A reminder that wonder and data can share a night. In February, a sheep named Dolly is announced, cloned in Scotland from adult cells. A careful lab technique that opens doors for medicine and husbandry. And a continent begins a long conversation about what should be done just because it can be done. In Geneva, the Hipparcos and Tycho star catalogues are published. Precise positions for more than 1 million stars. Navigation for astronomers and spacecraft alike. The quiet power of measurement. The Hubble telescope, corrected and calm, fills journals and classrooms with sharp images. Pillars and disks, nebulae and clusters. Instruments run like metronomes. In October, Cassini-Huygens launches towards Saturn, a joint mission with a European probe for Titan. Years of cruise ahead. Patients strapped to a stack of propellant. Around Mars, Global Surveyor arrives in September to begin mapping, while Pathfinder's Sojourner rover spends summer testing wheels and sensors on a small patch of red. European researchers join teams and harvest data, and a generation of students chooses degrees because of one rover's short paths. At a tropical launch site, Ariane 5 returns to flight after the previous year's loss, a qualification mission that restores confidence. Software corrected, procedures rewritten, the courage of method on display. Computing and communications. The net grows up, and phones learn to speak lightly across campuses and offices. TCP/IP is default, browsers ordinary, and home dial-up becomes a family routine with evening whirs and patient progress bars. A pan-European backbone called TEN, 34 links, national research networks at high speed. Supercomputing centers share capacity, and datasets travel across borders faster than some trains. Wi-Fi 802.11 is standardized in its first form. Modest speeds, big implications. The idea that radio can be the last meter of the net becomes practical. CSS gets its first recommendation. XML begins to take shape. And developers discover that tidy structure makes pages easier to keep and share. Java matures. Applets dance inside pages. And server-side Java begins a long, steady climb, while JavaScript teaches pages to breathe without plugins. In December, Hotmail is bought by a large software company. Free webmail turns from curiosity into infrastructure. Reachable from any terminal with patience and a dial tone. Across Europe, GSM densifies. DCS 1800 fills cities. Roaming works widely. Prepaid SIMs open access to younger users and travellers. And predictive text appears in early forms, making thumbs almost as fast as thoughts. A WARP forum is founded by handset and network companies. A small group with a large promise, that the web's ideas can reach pocket screens politely. Energy and environment. Kyoto's line in the sand. And quiet engineering. In December, the Kyoto Protocol is agreed. Binding targets for greenhouse gases. Flexible mechanisms designed in committee rooms with more spreadsheets than slogans. And Europe prepares national plans to make numbers real. Utilities add combined cycle gas capacity. District heating networks tighten insulation and metering. And building codes climb another small, steady step. On coasts and ridges, wind projects expand, grid codes improve. Maintenance crews grow expert with blades and gearboxes. And spreadsheets treat wind as a resource rather than a rumour. Packaging and waste rules mature. Recovery systems scale. And municipalities modernise sorting halls where the sound is conveyor belts and steady work. Transport and infrastructure. Rails agree, bridges gather, skies dependable. High-speed corridors add links in France, Germany, Spain, and Italy. Signalling pilots for interoperable train control advance. And dispatchers learn to trust new screens. On the Ursen corridor, bridge and tunnel segments advance toward their meeting dates. Welding arcs over dark water. A future timetable taking shape in steel. Under the sea, the Channel Tunnel settles into ordinary excellence. Eurostar and shuttles keep time, and freight paths are traded like promises. In the air, A319/A320/A330 fleets expand. Avionics and composites turning drawings into reliable distance. And low-cost carriers test a model that will soon redraw weekend maps. At a tropical launch site, Ariane 4 keeps its calm cadence. Television, weather, and data satellites ride to orbit. The sky extending fiber and coax with a dependable glow. Industry and manufacturing. Standards inside the machine. Automakers calibrate for Euro 2 emissions. Catalysts and sensors become culture rather than afterthought. And crash labs refine shells that fail gracefully. Machine tool builders push CNC into mid-sized suppliers. Tolerances improve. Scrap falls. Productivity rises by design, not exhaustion. Handset makers across the Nordics lead GSM mass-market design. Smaller boards, better batteries, and a pocket language that will become second nature. Pharmaceutical plants validate clean rooms and batch records. Biotech spin out scale enzymes, diagnostics, and antibodies. And the European Medicines Agency proves its procedures with a steady cadence of approvals. Caution preserved by method rather than delay. Education and research. Mobility as routine. Networks as tools. Erasmus exchanges expand. ECTS credit transfer feels predictable. And Socrates and Leonardo give languages and vocational skills budgets rather than brochures. In Central and Eastern Europe, Tempus modernizes curricula. Engineering labs are upgraded. Economics programs teach market models. And deans compare notes with partners they once knew only by journal footnotes. 1034's bandwidth turns collaboration into habit. Medical imaging datasets cross borders overnight. Climate models ingest satellite archives. And students learn that "send me the link" is a complete sentence. Medicine and public health. Careful advances. Triple therapy for HIV becomes routine across leading European clinics. Viral loads drop. Hospital wards breathe easier. And public health surveillance learns to count success as well as risk. Food safety reforms continue after prior scandals. Traceability improves. Regulators and labs behave like one system. And consumer confidence returns shelf by shelf. Hospitals install more MRI and CT capacity. Picture archiving pilots expand. And telemedicine links between regional centres and small hospitals move from demonstration to scheduling. Bioethics councils meet more often. Cloning prompts, rules, and registries. Research frameworks tie funding to oversight that the public can read and trust. Diplomacy and security. Hard news. Institutions over improvisation. In Northern Ireland, a renewed ceasefire in summer and inclusive talks in autumn set the table for agreements to come. Procedural patience beating spectacle, minute by minute. In the Balkans, I-4 transitions to S4. Roads reopen, bridges and schools are repaired, and the habit of coordinated logistics becomes a European craft. In Albania, a financial collapse sparks unrest. European missions help stabilize, evacuate, and rebuild basic services. A reminder that institutional plumbing matters as much as speeches. Across the Atlantic, the Asian financial crisis begins in July. Currency waves travel quickly. European treasuries monitor exposures. Export markets wobble. And central banks rehearse the art of calm communication. Late in summer, a car crash in Paris takes Diana, Princess of Wales. Europe pauses. Debates about media conduct and road safety sharpen. And the lesson settles that technology must serve care, not chase speed. Media, culture, signals on balconies, law on the pitch, DVB digital television profiles mature, Broadcasters and manufacturers align, and trials expand in several countries. Living rooms inch toward a clearer, more flexible picture. MP3 encoders from Fraunhofer move from lab license to hobbyist computers. A new grammar for sound begins. Engineers in bedrooms teach the industry that compression can be artful. Under football's Bosman rules, squads and academies reorganize. Freedom of movement reshapes strategy, and a generation of players chooses clubs with maps in mind. Everyday life. The texture of connection, ATMs and bank cards feel universal. Barcode scanners shorten queues, and shop systems quietly learn what sells where. Modems sing in the evening. Email becomes a family habit. Web pages load with patience, and a free webmail address ties travel and study together. Mobiles buzz in cafes, prepaid makes them social, and short messages begin to replace postcards. Brief lines that cross borders with a dial tone's ease. Weekend plans include tunnels and fast trains. Low-cost routes multiply, and a bridge rising over cold water promises that two cities will soon feel like neighbours. A quiet closing. So 1997 folds itself away, with Amsterdam signed, Schengen deepened, the Hipparcos map released, Hail-bop bright over quiet streets, Dolly provoking careful law, Cassini-Huygens on its long road, Surveyor mapping Mars, TEN-34 humming, Wi-Fi standardized, GSM and prepaid making phones social, Kyoto drawing a clean line in policy. We will leave the year here, tools put down, lights dimmed, calendars turned. When you're ready, we'll open 1998, quietly, and carry on. 1998, the year Europe switched the future. On a year when Europe chose the contours of its money, tuned its networks, opened new eyes on earth and sky, and the wider world sent headlines that still echo. The continent moves from plan to practice, committees to control rooms, proposals to procurement. Servers hum in libraries, high-speed rails agree on signals, labs align their calendars with satellites, and ordinary mornings begin to carry the future without fuss. Europe's architecture, the euro, takes shape. Borders behave like agreements. In May, leaders select the first group for the euro. 11 countries ready to share a currency. Budgets and statistics checked line by line. On the 1st of June, the European Central Bank stands up in Frankfurt. The EMI bows out. Systems and staff shift to a new rhythm, and a single monetary policy moves from promise to near present. On 31st December, conversion rates are fixed, numbers that will live in tills and textbooks, ready for 1st January 1999, when the euro begins its non-cash life. Schengen practice deepens. Morning trains grow quieter at frontiers. Police systems learn to carry responsibility as well as convenience. In June, the Common Gas Market Directive is adopted, opening pipelines by rule rather than rumour, unbundling networks from supply, and teaching energy to speak the language of the single market. Science and space, stations begin, eyes recover, telescopes wake in November. The first module of the International Space Station launches. A quiet cylinder named Zarya, power and propulsion for a laboratory that will take years to assemble. Europe's Columbus lab planned on the drawing boards and spreadsheets of Bremen and Turin. In December, Unity follows. An American node with many European fingerprints. Two bright objects joined in the dark. a station born from bolts and patience. In June, contact with SOHO is lost, a silent sunwatcher drifting. Then, after long weeks of analysis, controllers coax it back, instruments warmed and checked, a recovery that turns relief into better procedure, high above the poles. ERS1/ERS2, map ice, waves, and coasts. Radar building an archive for climate, shipping, and insurance. Centimeters and decibels turned into decisions. On a Chilean mountain, the first unit of the Very Large Telescope sees first light. European optics and control systems turning thin air and glass into a sharp new eye. Particle physicists celebrate evidence that neutrinos have mass, oscillating as they travel. A small property with large consequences. A reminder that nature still keeps careful secrets. Astronomers strengthen the case that the universe is accelerating. Distant supernovae, dimmer than expected. Gravity's script rewritten by something we will call dark energy. A quiet, unsettling, beautiful result. Computing and communications. Names, search, and pocket habits. In September, a company named Google is founded. Links ordered by reputation, rather than shouting. Students and researchers discover that finding can be faster than searching. In October, ICANN is created to 10 names and numbers. The net's directory given a governance home. Dull in the best way. Windows 98 settles into offices and homes. iMac brings a friendly face to domestic screens, and DVD players begin their careful march through living rooms. The MP3 player moves from lab curiosity to pocket object, a small rectangle that turns a format into a habit, while broadband is still a promise and patience is called dial-up. Across Europe, GSM densifies. DCS 1800 fills cities. Prepaid SIMS, open access to younger users and travellers. SMS volumes climb, and predictive text makes thumbs almost as fast as thoughts. Backbones upgrade from 1034 to 10155. Research networks sprint between capitals. Datasets cross borders faster than trains. And shared supercomputing begins to feel routine. Energy and environment. Kyoto's homework, pipelines, wind, and watts. After Kyoto, ministries turn intent into inventory. Burden-sharing tables become budgets. Engineers inherit deadlines rather than slogans. The gas market directive opens valves on fair terms. Competition rules meet compressors and meters. And pipeline capacity is scheduled as carefully as rail path slots. Wind projects scale in Germany, Spain, Denmark. Grid codes improve. Crews learn blade and gearbox rituals. And kilowatt hours saved begin to earn the same respect as kilowatt hours generated. District heating networks tighten insulation. Combined cycle gas plants add units. And building codes climb a steady small step. Transport and infrastructure. Rails agree, bridges join. Tunnels become timetables. High-speed corridors add segments in France, Germany, Spain, Italy. Signaling pilots for interoperable control advance. Dispatchers learn to trust new screens. Across Öresund, bridge and tunnel sections inch toward each other. Welders over dark water. A timetable taking shape in steel and concrete. Under the sea, the Channel Tunnel is ordinary in the best sense. Eurostar keeps time. Shuttles hum. And freight paths are traded like promises. In the air, a 319/A320/A330 fleets grow. Low-cost carriers sketch new weekend geographies. and avionics turn weather into manageable problems. At Kourou, Ariane 4 keeps its calm cadence, and Ariane 5 returns to success. Software corrected, procedures tightened, confidence rebuilt by method, industry and manufacturing, standards inside the machine. Automakers calibrate for Euro 2 emissions. Catalysts and sensors become culture rather than afterthought. And crash labs turn energy into survivable shapes. Machine tool builders push CNC deeper into mid-sized suppliers. Scrap falls, tolerances tighten. Productivity rises by design, not exhaustion. Handset makers in the Nordics refine thin, robust forms. Battery chemistry improves, and Europe's pocket language becomes light and durable. Pharmaceutical plants validate clean rooms and batch records. Biotech spin out scale enzymes, diagnostics, and antibodies. The European Medicines Agency moves dossiers with a cadence that feels dependable rather than dramatic. Education and research. Mobility normal. Frameworks renewed, Erasmus exchanges expand. ECTS credit transfer feels predictable. And Socrates and Leonardo give languages and vocational skills budgets rather than brochures. The 5th framework program is approved. Themes from information society to life sciences. Consortia form with less ceremony and more experience. And shared infrastructure, synchrotrons, data networks, space-time, becomes the fabric of science rather than the headline. In Central and Eastern Europe, Tempus keeps curricular reforms on schedule. Labs are upgraded, economics learns market models, and deans compare notes with partners they once knew only by journal footnotes. Medicine and public health, careful advances and new tools. Clinics across Europe adopt triple therapy for HIV as standard. Viral loads drop. Hospital wards breathe easier. And surveillance learns to count success as well as risk. Regulators approve sildenafil for certain patients. A specific pill for a specific problem. Quality of life quietly improved by pharmacology and good trial design. Food safety reforms continue after earlier crises. Traceability strengthens. Inspection becomes culture. And public trust is rebuilt shelf by shelf. Telemedicine pilots connect regional centres with small hospitals. Picture archiving expands, and radiology becomes a routine staircase rather than a special event. Diplomacy and security. A Good Friday. A hard August. A tense autumn. On 10th April, the Good Friday Agreement is signed. A framework for Northern Ireland's politics and policing. Referendums say yes. Institutions and cross-border bodies begin their careful life. Procedure chosen over improvisation. In August, a bomb in Omagh ends lives and breaks hearts. The worst single day of the Troubles. And yet the agreement holds. Support hardens, and the machinery of peace keeps moving. Quietly, stubbornly. The Kosovo crisis escalates through the year. Monitors and mediators work. An OSCE mission arrives, and Europe prepares tools it hopes not to use. On the 17th of August, Russia defaults. Markets shudder. And in September, a large American fund is rescued to protect the plumbing of finance. Europe's treasuries learn again that stability is a system, not a slogan. Farther away, embassy bombings in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam kill and wound. Security services coordinate across continents, and Europe strengthens cooperation against threats that do not respect maps. Media, culture, and sport. A summer of noise and a new dial tone. France 98 fills July. France lifts the World Cup after a final in Saint-Denis. Cities glow into the night. And youth programs across Europe fill in September. Proof that sport can be policy. Digital TV trials under the DVB umbrella expand. Terrestrial services launch in the UK. And living rooms begin the slow migration to clearer pictures and flexible schedules. CDs share space with MP3 files. A small player in a pocket teaches that compression can be culture. And broadcasters post their first cautious websites with schedules and articles that load line by line. Everyday life, the texture of connection, ATMs and bank cards feel universal. Barcode scanners shorten queues, and shop systems quietly learn what sells where. Modems sing in the evening. Email becomes a family habit. A new search page finds its way onto bookmarks. And a free webmail address ties travel and study together. Mobiles buzz in cafes. Prepaid makes them social. Short messages replace postcards. And weekend plans now include tunnels, fast trains, and a bridge rising over cold water. A quiet closing. So 1998 folds itself away. With ECB doors open, euro rates fixed, gas markets open by law. ISS modules joined in the dark, SOHO recovered. ERS steady, a VLT awake. Neutrinos with mass. A universe that accelerates. ICANN to 10 names. Google to find them. GSM to carry short thoughts. And research backbones that move data like water. The year taught that progress is often the sound of ventilation in a lab. A relay clicking in a substation. A modem's patient whir. A quiet handshake on orbit. We will leave the year here. Tools put down. Lights dimmed. Calendars turned. When you're ready, we'll open 1999. Quietly. And carry on. 1999, the year Europe drew new lines, then followed them. A year when Europe finalized its money, wired its classrooms, refined its laws, opened new eyes on earth and sky, and met hard headlines with steady systems. Across the continent, committees become control rooms. Proposals become procurement, and a currency turns from plan to number. Networks knit universities. Factories retune for cleaner standards, and ordinary mornings begin to carry the future without fuss. Europe's architecture. The euro arrives on paper. Borders behave like agreements. On the 1st of January, Stage 3 of monetary union begins. The euro starts life in non-cash form. Bonds, accounts, and markets priced in a single script. National notes still in wallets, but the arithmetic already changed. The European Central Bank finds its rhythm. Rates set for 11 states. Payment systems synchronize. And treasuries learn to speak in one currency with many accents. Schengen practice deepens. Morning trains grow quieter at frontiers. Shared databases and procedures carry responsibility as well as convenience. In June, leaders sign the Cologne Conclusions, shaping a common European security and defense policy. And by autumn, Javier Solana becomes the Union's first High Representative, giving foreign policy a steadier voice. In December, the Helsinki Council sets a broad enlargement path, recognizes Turkey as a candidate, and folds the Stability Pact for Southeastern Europe into daily work. Paperwork as peacekeeping, science and space, a darkened sun, a new X-ray eye. careful lessons on Mars. On 11 August, a total solar eclipse crosses Europe, Cornwall to Romania. Cities pause under twilight at noon. Observatories measure corona and temperature drops. Families glance skyward through filters. Science and wonder sharing a minute. In December, XMM, Newton launches. Europe's X-ray observatory. Mirrors nested like silver petals. Ready to read the hot universe. Black holes, clusters, and shock fronts mapped with calm precision. The Hubble telescope and Europe's ground observatories refine the case for an accelerating universe. Supernova surveys lengthen. Models adjust. A quiet revolution phrased in plots rather than proclamations. Around Mars, hard news arrives. Mars Climate Orbiter is lost in September to a unit mismatch. Mars Polar. Lander falls silent in December. Engineering turns grief into checklists. Reviews and standards strengthened. Europe's teams absorb the lessons for missions ahead. SOHO resumes steady solar watching after last year's recovery. ERS 1/ERS 2 continue radar maps of coasts, ice, and waves. And the Ulysses spacecraft carries on its polar survey of the Sun. Patience measured in orbits, computing and communications. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, search that actually finds. Music that turns into files. A faster standard for wireless local networks, 802.11b, is approved. Radios become the last meter of the net. Offices and libraries plan without cables. The first Bluetooth specification is published. A quiet cable replacement for short distances. Future headsets and keyboards imagined in committee rooms. A young search engine named Google gains admirers. Links ordered by reputation rather than shouting. Students and labs discover that finding can be faster than searching. Linux 2.2 arrives. Stronger networking, SMP, file systems. Open source becomes a dependable server choice, and European sysadmins adopt it with practical enthusiasm. Napster appears in the summer. Compressed audio traded by curious teenagers and tired engineers. Law and culture begin a long conversation about copying when the carrier is a number. Across Europe, GSM densifies. DCS 1800 fills cities. Prepaid SIMS make phones social. SMS volumes surge. And a green light on a screen begins to mean a friend is nearby. Handsets add WAP for light pages. Nokia shows a spring-loaded browser on a phone. And developers learn to design for tiny screens with patient menus. Energy and environment. Rules with a screwdriver. Waste buried more wisely. The landfill directive is adopted. Stricter lining and gas capture. Separate collection of hazardous streams. And national plans to reduce biodegradable waste in tips. Engineering for soil and air rather than slogans. The Gothenburg Protocol is agreed under the UNECE umbrella. Targets for SO2, NOx, ammonia, and VOCs. Acid rain and ozone precursors reduced by inventory rather than wish. Wind power scales in Germany, Spain, Denmark. Grid codes mature. Crews learn blade and gearbox rituals. And kilowatt hours saved earn the same respect as kilowatt hours generated. Combined cycle gas plants add units. District heating networks tighten insulation and metering. And building codes climb another small, steady step. Across the continent, committees become control rooms. Proposals become procurement. And a currency turns from plan to number. Networks knit universities. Factories retune for cleaner standards. and ordinary mornings begin to carry the future without fuss. Europe's architecture, the euro arrives on paper. Borders behave like agreements. On the 1st of January, Stage 3 of monetary union begins. The euro starts life in non-cash form. Bonds, accounts, and markets priced in a single script. National notes still in wallets, but the arithmetic already changed. The European Central Bank finds its rhythm. Rates set for 11 states. Payment systems synchronize. And treasuries learn to speak in one currency with many accents. Schengen practice deepens. Morning trains grow quieter at frontiers. Shared databases and procedures carry responsibility as well as convenience. In June, leaders sign the Cologne Conclusions, shaping a common European security and defense policy. And by autumn, Javier Solana becomes the Union's first High Representative, giving foreign policy a steadier voice. In December, the Helsinki Council sets a broad enlargement path, recognizes Turkey as a candidate, and folds the Stability Pact for Southeastern Europe into daily work, paperwork as peacekeeping, science and space, a darkened sun, a new X-ray eye, careful lessons on Mars. On 11th August, a total solar eclipse crosses Europe, Cornwall to Romania. Cities pause under twilight at noon. Observatories measure corona and temperature drops. Families glance skyward through filters. Science and wonder sharing a minute. In December, XMM Newton launches. Europe's X-ray observatory. Mirrors nested like silver petals. Ready to read the hot universe. Black holes, clusters, and shock fronts mapped with calm precision. The Hubble telescope and Europe's ground observatories refine the case for an accelerating universe. Supernova surveys lengthen. Models adjust. A quiet revolution phrased in plots rather than proclamations. Around Mars, hard news arrives. Mars Climate Orbiter is lost in September to a unit mismatch. Mars Polar Lander falls silent in December. Engineering turns grief into checklists. Reviews and standards strengthened. Europe's teams absorb the lessons for missions ahead. SOHO resumes steady solar watching after last year's recovery. ERS-1/ERS-2 continue radar maps of coasts, ice, and waves. And the Ulysses spacecraft carries on its polar survey of the sun. Patience measured in orbits, computing and communications. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. Search that actually finds. Music that turns into files. A faster standard for wireless local networks, 802.11b, is approved. Radios become the last meter of the net. Offices and libraries plan without cables. The first Bluetooth specification is published. A quiet cable replacement for short distances. Future headsets and keyboards imagined in committee rooms. A young search engine named Google gains admirers. Links ordered by reputation rather than shouting. Students and labs discover that finding can be faster than searching. Linux 2.2 arrives. Stronger networking, SMP, file systems. Open source becomes a dependable server choice. And European sysadmins adopt it with practical enthusiasm. Napster appears in the summer. Compressed audio traded by curious teenagers and tired engineers. Law and culture begin a long conversation about copying when the carrier is a number. Across Europe, GSM densifies. DCS 1800 fills cities. Prepaid SIMS make phones social. SMS volumes surge. And a green light on a screen begins to mean a friend is nearby. Handsets add WAP for light pages. Nokia shows a spring-loaded browser on a phone, and developers learn to design for tiny screens with patient menus. Energy and environment, rules with a screwdriver, waste buried more wisely. The landfill directive is adopted, stricter lining and gas capture, separate collection of hazardous streams, and national plans to reduce biodegradable waste in tips, engineering for soil and air rather than slogans. The Gothenburg Protocol is agreed under the UNECE umbrella, targets for SO2, NOx, ammonia, and VOCs. Acid rain and ozone precursors reduced by inventory rather than wish. Wind power scales in Germany, Spain, Denmark. Grid codes mature. Crews learn blade and gearbox rituals. And kilowatt hours saved earn the same respect as kilowatt hours generated. Combined cycle gas plants add units. District heating networks tighten insulation and metering. And building codes climb another small, steady step. Diplomacy and security. Kosovo's hard spring. Institutions over improvisation. From March to June, the Kosovo crisis escalates. NATO air operations force withdrawals. Refugees crowd borders. And aid routes are organised with logistics that feel like engineering. In June, UN Security Council 1244 sets a path. KFOR enters. Civil administration begins. And Europe practices the long, unglamorous work of stabilisation. Bridges, schools, registries, power lines. The Northern Ireland Agreement moves into operation. Institutions open in December, powers devolved. And the habit of procedure steadies a place that once trusted only to improvisation. Europol becomes fully operational on the 1st of July. Police cooperation gains a home. Databases and teams replace ad hoc phone calls. Quiet competence as security policy. Media, culture. Signals on balconies. A treble at the whistle. Digital TV under the DVB family expands pilots and launches. Terrestrial services grow. Satellite packages diversify. And living rooms inch toward clearer pictures and flexible schedules. MP3 settles into student flats and train commutes. Headphones turn commutes into private concerts. And broadcasters experiment with early streams. Sound moving as numbers with surprising grace. In May, Manchester United completes a treble with a final one in stoppage time. A small parable that planning and luck are partners, and that European nights can end with a tidy miracle, everyday life, the texture of connection, and a clock that worries politely. ATMs and chip cards feel universal. Barcode scanners shorten queues, and shop systems quietly learn what sells where. Modems sing in the evening. A few homes try cable or DSL. A green light means mail has arrived, and bookmarks multiply. Mobiles buzz in cafes. Prepaid keeps students connected. Messages replace postcards, and a new habit emerges: to check the phone before the door. Offices rehearse for Y2K, patches applied, tests run at midnight, contingency binders printed, and the world learns that prevention is a kind of quiet heroism, a quiet closing. So 1999 folds itself away, with the euro living as a number, Bologna giving degrees a common map, landfill rules turning waste into engineering, an eclipse at noon, XMM, Newton awake, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth named, Google finding things cleanly, Napster testing law and culture, GSM and SMS becoming social glue, Kosovo stabilized by logistics and law. We will leave the year here, tools put down, Lights dimmed, calendars turned. When you're ready. So the decade folds away, with standards instead of slogans, cables instead of checkpoints, and ordinary days that are anything but ordinary. A continent learns to trust procedures, to wire its classrooms, to measure its skies, and to let bridges, tunnels, and browsers do the talking. When next we open the page, the calendar will read 2000. Cash euros, broadband habits, pocket internet, and new eyes in orbit. For now, rest with the gentle hum of servers, rails, and quiet laws. The sound of a Europe that chose patience and made progress feel like breathing.